What up, Wizards? It's Dev. SBMTG, we like it a magic. And Ziggy, you're here too. Sorry, Bubba. You're a person. We all love you. We together are SBMTG, we like it a magic. And today, first deck tech, a Duskmourn standard. Pretty excited about this one, even though this is the second time I've recorded this video. Don't really want to speak on it. Turns out lost or corrupted data is kind of a Duskmourn level nightmare event for a content creator. I'm traumatized, don't want to talk about it. But you know what I do want to talk about? Duskmourn standard. Got a mean deck for you today, my friends. So step into my parlor, said the spider to the fly, and gaze at all the wondrous things that you will see inside. And if you spy something you like, you may take whatever you find. For before you leave this house tonight, something of yours will be mine. Hey, how come I'm facing in this direction now? Like, when exactly did that happen? I think I may have lost some time at some point. You guys still here? Yes. Thanks for sticking around while I was out for a moment, I guess. I'm not sure what just happened. It was probably some wacky Duskmourn stuff, because we've been having kind of a lot of that happen around here lately, so I should probably get on with it before we get Duskmourned again. And we got to get to it, because there's a lot of brand new stuff to discuss today. It's been a long time since I've seen a new set come along and contribute this many cards to a deck that I thought was this powerful. Duskmourn is all over this thing, but conversely, another cool thing about it is that it also lifts up a card from a few sets ago that a lot of us had high hopes for, but hasn't quite lived up to that potential. But now, it finally can in a powerful new combo deck. Let's look at Overlord's Conquest. Have I been replaced by a black screen and like glitches and stuff like that? How long ago did that happen? Duskmourn. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Make sure you like the video. It's the button shaped like a thumb. You could also sub to the channel if you feel like it, and I hope you do after all we've been through together. And apart from that, you can also compensate me for the work that I put in if you feel like doing that. Money can be given on patreon.com. Link in the description if you feel like doing that. If you don't, that's fine. I'm just glad that you're here. Let's get to it. I was really excited to try out these first two cards in this deck, man. We get to play full play sets of two of the brand new Overlords from Duskmourn. In this case, it's Overlord of the Baelmerk and Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, an even more hilarious name. These are funny names, but do take them seriously. If you think these guys look like bilge water, we're gonna fight. They turned out to be incredible for me. So much so that I'm putting Overlord of the Baelmerk in like every deck that I'm building this season so far. I'm just kind of obsessed with the dude, follow him around, take pictures, but apart from that, he's a great piece of value, man. You get him down on turn 2, and eventually he'll become a creature, start getting you even more value. But the selection that he gives you this early in the game is great, especially considering you can play out of your graveyard too. So he's not quite drawing you 4 cards or anything, but he's coming really, really close in a deck like this. But even with how much I've been jamming Overlord of the Baelmerk into like everything and loving him in this deck too, he still kind of ends up feeling like a sidekick next to Overlord of the Boiler Bilges here, because this dude is involved in a ton of our one-turn kill combos. And we'll demonstrate a few of those combos as we move through the video here. In our example game, he'll be womboing, comboing, and running wild on the thing. And I've even got a clip here coming up in just a second where he's part of a 22 damage turn virtually out of nowhere against an opponent. So this dude is a superstar at just killing them when they didn't expect to be killed, and that's like the best thing about the dude. But I gotta say, too, he's just good value. He's a serviceable removal spell on turn 4 if you want to play him with Impending, and you should. More on that in just a second. When I get to what the actual combo is, yeah, we'll get to it eventually. I promise, man. This is an old school deck tech. You got to delay gratification. We'll get to it in a moment. But again, just as a magic card outside of weird, wacky, wild combos you can end the game with, he's just a solid dude, too. And just a quick point about Impend here that I wanted to bring up is that this ability has been great for me so far, especially on stuff like Baelmerk that you can Impend relatively early in the game. It doesn't matter that your opponent knows that it's impending and sees it coming. You're still going to play other creatures they're going to feel the need to play their removal spells on. If you play enough creatures, they're going to feel the need to run that sweeper, right? But your dude's still over here impending. They're going to have to deal with it eventually, so it leads to this like phase 2 of most games where like they need to remove the dude because he finally unimpended, but like they're more or less dry on cards at that point. So I really like that about more or less all of these Overlords that I've played. But hey, Dev, you promised us a combo back there at the beginning of the video. What was that, 20 minutes ago now? I'm not even sure if I'm being hyperbolic anymore. I've lost track of time. I say a lot of words and it takes me a long time to say them. But yeah, you guys remember Lich-Knights Conquest over here? It came out like a year ago or something like that in the Eldraine set. And a lot of us people who are more or less employed brewing Magic the Gathering decks were like, you're a good card. It wasn't a good card. Turned out not to be very good. We all brewed with it, and the stew was a little bit cold, the coffee was burnt, whatever metaphor you want to use. The card just hasn't quite been ready until right now. Now, if it's not exactly jumping out at you yet, you see how Lich-Knight's Conquest allows you to sacrifice enchantments and whatnot in order to bring creatures back from your graveyard? Well, guess what? Overlords are both of those things, and it turns out the way the timing works, if you have an Overlord that's impending on the table that you cast earlier in the game, you can sacrifice it to a Lich-Knight's Conquest, and then Lich-Knight's Conquest can bring it back from your graveyard where it immediately becomes a creature, and you get to repeat its ETB triggers. So, if I've got an impending Overlord of the Baelmerk on the table, and I sacrifice it to Lich-Knights, I can just put it right back on the table, and mill 4 cards and grab some card advantage. But even more importantly, if I've got like an Overlord of the Boiler Bilges out and one in my graveyard, that means I can sacrifice the Overlord of the Boiler Bilges that's on the table along with a token or an artifact or another enchantment or something like that, and then get 2 Overlord of the Boiler Bilges back as creatures, immediately dealing 8 damage to my opponent. And I know 8 damage doesn't sound game-winning in every situation, but lucky for me, that's not all I have to say on the matter. You see, what if we had a way of giving the guys haste the turn they came into play? That way we get the ETB triggers and the attacks triggers on the same turn. What if we had a way of copying them and attacking with the copies so we get the ETB triggers from the copies? That'd be pretty insane. What if we had a way of untapping an Overlord and attacking with it again on the same turn that it's already attacked? All of that would be pretty swell, right? Well, the deck actually has ways of doing all 3 of those things without playing a single bad card. Well, maybe one bad card. I think some people are going to dispute that previous statement and think I'm just horsing around here, but it turns out Calamity Galloping Inferno is kind of the perfect card for this deck. Yeah, I know it seems like a bunch of horse pucky, but we got plenty of ways of discarding this into our yard in the early game, just getting it back with a Lich-Knight's Conquest at the same time that we get back like an Overlord of the Boiler Bilges. So we'll get that ETB trigger, saddle up Calamity, Boiler Bilges will copy itself twice, we'll get those ETB triggers, and now we're attacking for 12 damage. All out of nowhere. Calamity is good enough for this deck, but I wouldn't put in more than a couple of copies. But when you do hit it, it is very satisfying, like this game where we took a tricky Otters player from 18 to -4 all in one turn using this aforementioned combo. I'm telling you, when Calamity works, she works very well, and in a Reanimator deck, you probably need more than just a few huge dudes anyway. We had 8 Overlords, but again, we needed a big flying elbow drop from the top rope, man, a finishing move, and Calamity is really good at being that. I know it seems like a pretty chaotic include, but she's actually very stable. Sorry, let's move on. We got 1 copy of the weirdest looking card in the entire deck, and one that I'll probably just have to justify for way too long, but it's Fear of Burning Alive. Yes, I am playing 1 copy of this card in the deck. This is actually kind of a holdover from when I was playing a more like budget version of the deck before I had all of these mythic wildcards and stuff right when the set came out on Arena. And I decided that Fear of Burning Alive would be a fun little substitute for Overlord of the Boiler Bilges until I got all 4 copies of it. Well, I was eventually on 3 copies of Boiler Bilges and 2 copies of Fear of Burning Alive. And once I got the 4th Boiler Bilges, I kind of still wanted to play a Fear of Burning Alive because there are some spots, and they're honestly not too rare spots, where like this can be better than a Boiler Bilges. I know this dude looks kind of lame as like a 5th copy of Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, but Boiler Bilges is so important in this combo deck that a 5th copy is more than warranted. Give the dude a shot, man. You'll like him. But next is our way of giving these guys haste. We just got 2 copies of Enduring Courage. A dog named Courage. I can't think of any funny references for that. Now, of course, Courage can give either Muriel or Eustace haste. That's what I'm calling Baelmerk and Boiler Bilges from now on, because I'm kind of sick of saying Boiler Bilges. He'll be Eustace. Hey, Ziggy, what's going on? Good to have you. I got him to come over here. He's on this side now. But yeah, this does more than just give your Overlords haste, but it's really awesome at doing that. I do, though, before we get off the card, have to point out that it doesn't necessarily work the way that you wanted to with Lich-Knight's Conquest. And I thought it would work, but it doesn't work. So let me pass on my lack of knowledge to you so it's no longer your lack of knowledge. Now, you probably already knew this. I have to give you some credit because you're always smarter than me. But if you have an Enduring Courage sitting on your side of the table, It's a creature. It's sitting there looking at you with its big old puppy dog eyes, and you're like, oh, you're nice. And then you cast the Lich-Knights Conquest, and you sacrifice that Enduring Courage. The way the timing is going to work here is that you're going to bring a bunch of dudes back with Lich-Knights Conquest, and then after the card resolves and finishes resolving, then Enduring Courage will come back as an enchantment, meaning that you're going to miss the chance to give all them dudes haste that you just brought back with Lich-Knights Conquest. So don't get too cute and think that you can sack an Enduring Courage to a Lich-Knights Conquest and give all them boys haste when they come back. Smart play then, in this case, is to simply not sacrifice the Enduring Courage to the Lich-Knights Conquest, right? And that way, all the dudes you bring back will get the +2/+0 in haste, and then you win the game. Pretty much universally, you'll win the game a lot of the time in that situation. Now, I'm also on an entire playset of Fear of Missing Out in this deck. Originally, I was on 2, and then realized I was in fact missing out. The card is too good in this deck. We don't necessarily need a way to filter cards into our graveyard, but it's nice to be able to drop off a Fear of Burning Alive or a Calamity or another like really expensive dude so that we don't necessarily have to worry about casting them. We ain't gotta cast dudes. We got money. We can reanimate them later. It ain't no big deal. So filtering cards is actually nice because it also lets us draw into important stuff. If we don't have a Conquest yet, this will help us draw into it. On top of that, once we have either of the Overlords out, or Calamity for that matter, God forbid this works with Calamity, it absolutely does, but I didn't get to do that too often. But if you just repeat the attack step of an Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, that's another way to win a game of Magic. And it ain't too hard to get to Delirium to make that actually happen, man. It looks like it might be kind of tough to get Delirium, but we have enough card types and enough different numbers of all the different card types to where Delirium is a little bit easier to hit than it might appear, especially when Bale Merc is milling so many cards over the course of a game. But I really couldn't decide between red 2-drop 3/2s in this deck, so I decided to go with a playset of Piggy Bank as well. Man, this card is an artifact, so you can sacrifice it to Lich-Knights Conquest if you feel like doing that. And a lot of times you do because it'll also leave behind a treasure token. You can trade it in combat with a lot of different important creatures right now and leave behind that treasure, thus ramping into the Lich-Knights Conquest on occasion. And there's been plenty of times where I just couldn't find the 5th land and the treasure token from this card was the 5th land. So yeah, all day, all 4 copies of this. You'll find yourself getting it back with the Lich-Knights Conquest a good bit because you might as well. If you've got one on the table and you've already attacked or you weren't going to attack that turn with it anyway, you might as well sack it to a Lich-Knights Conquest because that will leave behind a treasure token and you can just put Piggy Bank right back into play. This is another one that I've ended up putting in a bunch of other decks that I've been brewing up this season ever since I got to play it in this one because it saved my bacon so much. But next we got to look at Bitter Reunion, another kind of oldie but a goodie, man. It feels like we've been putting Bitter Reunion in decks for a long time now, but there's a reason for that. All that said though, soft slot alert on this one, you know? Sometimes I'm not sure this wouldn't be better as another creature or removal spell or synergistic element that's not just this, but a deck like this does need to see a lot of cards to make sure that we get to our important 4 of, you know, we've got a playset of Lich-Knights Conquest, but if we don't draw it, we don't draw it, and it's not necessarily super rare to think we might not draw that card. So we got to see a lot of cards, we got to filter cards too, and importantly, this is an enchantment that we can sacrifice to Lich-Knights Conquest when the time comes and get something big back. But if we've got an extra mana laying around, obviously, we can just reanimate the Boiler Bilges and Bale Mercs and whatever, you know, I guess I'm supposed to call them Muriels and Eustaces, and then just immediately attack with them. So yet another way of giving them boys haste. That's important in a deck like this too. So I say soft slot, but again, I'm kind of just not sure about it. This could probably be a 2 or 3 of, and I'd still be fine with it, but it feels like it does everything in this deck. As a matter of fact, I just kind of like it so much that I think I want another 2-drop enchantment that does something when it comes into play but can be sacrificed to Lich-Knights Conquest. There's something else like that? Well, Duskmourn gave us another thing like that. We got Nowhere to Run in this set. If you haven't seen this card yet, it's pretty wild. It basically turns off ward and hexproof and stuff once it's on the table, but it's also just a 2-mana flash -3/-3 to an opponent's creature, which is pretty great to have right now against the glut of Deep Cavern Bats and Heartfire Heroes and Monastery Swiftspears and freaking Slick Shots and stuff. There's always a creature to kill in the early turns of the game, so you really don't mind running a couple of extra removal spells. And in this case, this removal spell can be sacked to supercharge a Lich-Knights Conquest later. So yeah, we're you're going to play at least a couple of copies. But back to bitter cards. I don't feel like we put enough bitter cards in the deck, so I'm also running 2 bitter triumphs in here. If you really need to filter cards this much, I guess we have 10 different ways of doing it in this deck. Thanks to this as a 2-of, but it also gives us a very good removal spell that takes out any creature unconditionally, and importantly, planeswalkers as well. We can fight through certain planeswalkers. Opponent resolves a Liliana, and some of the times we're like, hey, thanks, we get to discard cards to that. In a similar vein, I'm also running 2 Go for the Throat. It's a removal spell that we don't have to discard cards or lose life to, which is sometimes really important in them early mono red turns, right? I don't want to lose 3 life to my own thing when I'm about to get hit for 37. You know what I mean? I guess it wouldn't matter at that point. I was too hyperbolic, but you get the point. We need a removal spell that doesn't necessarily cost us any resources whatsoever, and Go for the Throat's a good one to main deck. Let's take a look at the lands in the deck. There are 25 of them. Once upon a time, there were 26, but all I drew was lands for like 20 games in a row, over and over. So I decided, okay, we'll bring it back down to 25. And the card that I ended up cutting was Fountain Port, which seems like it should be in here, right? Makes tokens and stuff. You can sacrifice those to Conquest, maybe just win a long game with them. But yeah, in those same like 20-25 games, I think I activated Fountain Port once. So I just ended up kicking it out of the deck. 25 lands is enough. Little pieces of tech here, I guess, so that Fabled Passage is a land in the graveyard for turning on Delirium a little bit more easily. And Raucous Theater is both a swamp and a mountain. That means that it plays really well with Blazemire Verge, and so does Fabled Passage for that matter. Between both Raucous Theater and Passage on turn 1, turns out that we basically always have Blazemire Verge as like an old school dual land, untapped on turn 2, ready to produce whatever mana we want. Verge has been very, very good, and I can imagine that all of these new duels from Duskmourn that are like this are incredible. I've only gotten to play with a couple so far, and they have been good every time. But I think I got a little bit worked up talking about Blazemire Verge there. This land base is pretty good. It's a good deck, guys. I need to calm down a little bit, so I think what I need to do is just slow down for a second. Take a deep breath. Have myself a little coffee break. This week, on the coffee break, we'll be talking about the sideboard for this deck. We will start with the anti-aggro package, which is very important to run in the current format. We've got 3 copies of Cutdown, as well as 3 copies of Pyroclasm, and even 2 copies of Liliana of the Veil. Cutdown is a concession for all of the creatures that Dev previously mentioned, from Deep Cavern Bat to Heartfire Hero, and well beyond. Pyroclasm is included to deal with those same cards, but on a larger scale, and can nerf entire decks, from Boros to Lizards to plenty of other tokens-based strategies in Standard. Liliana can be leveraged in plenty of matchups, from aggro to mid-range, but her ability to make your opponent sacrifice a creature can be particularly good against a number of aggro decks that only play 12 or so creatures, like Mono Red and the new Enchantress deck. It is worth noting while we're looking at her that Liliana can also be put back into your hand from your graveyard with an Overlord of the Baelmerg, a play that comes up quite a bit. When it comes to slower and more controlling decks, we're leveraging 3 copies of Duress, as well as 2 copies of Urabrask's Forge. It's worth noting that Urabrask's Forge creates tokens and is itself an artifact, both card types that can be sacked to a Lich-Knights Conquest in a pinch. But when it comes to Duress, 3 copies may seem a bit like overkill, but in many situations, it will take casting more than one of these in a game to make sure our way is truly clear. And finally, the oddest card in the sideboard, the 2 copies of Ghost Vacuum. If our opponent is trying to mess around in our graveyard, especially with single target effects, then we can just target whatever card they're targeting with our own Ghost Vacuum and tuck it away safe and sound for later. Even if our opponent has the ability to remove our entire graveyard in one fell swoop, we can still use Ghost Vacuum to save 1 copy of Calamity or Overlord of the Boiler Bilges and bring it back later as a 1/1. In conclusion, Ghost Vacuum may seem like a very odd include in this deck, but if you're looking for a card that can both hate on graveyards while benefiting your own reanimation strategy, who else you gonna call? That's it for this week's coffee break. Now back to Dev with the power rankings for this video. More Duskmourn stuff there at the end of the coffee break. You know, I could see how living in a haunted house would just get irritating after a while more than it would be scary. But yeah, he mentioned there were power rankings. I don't know if you could understand the demon voice there, but yeah, here are the There's power rankings for this deck. The final score is 67 this time around. Now, as far as the actual power score goes, yeah, it gets an 8. You see how much all these cards cost? They're all rare and mythic and stuff. You see them rarity symbols? Yeah, it's a pretty powerful deck with a lot of very strong cards. But as far as the synergy goes, we tie those powerful cards together very well. And that, to me, is the secret sauce of this deck. Now, when you look at stats like speed and versatility, those aren't exactly off the charts. And even things like offense and defense, scores you probably want to be pretty high, at least one of them, right? They're not that impressive either, but again, where it really comes together here is the fact that more or less all of our cards are extremely powerful cards, almost no matter when you end up playing them on curve. But when you introduce all this synergy, you're juicing those already powerful cards to a level beyond the sum of their parts. And said in a not totally pretentious way, these cards are already good, and when you put them together, they get even better. And when you look at stats like resiliency here, right, or resilience, because I've had a lot of people tell me resiliency is not a word. Come on, man. Anyway, resilience is at about a 7, not only because of Lich-Knights Conquest, which, yes, is a reanimator card that can bring back stuff that already died. That's textbook's resilience, but at the same time, we've also got the impending cards, right? So again, they can remove our guys, they can sweep our guys, whatever. They still have to deal with the impending dudes later in the game if the game gets to that point, and that too is a form of resilience. And finally, consistency is pretty high here. I never really had any problems throughout the like 40 games I played with this deck ever getting either black or red mana. It does that very well because we get a bunch of different, dual lands now, and one of them is insane. Blazemire Verge is very, very good. I really want to hammer that point in, but the last thing I'll say here is that as far as like game 1 and board goes, we get a little bit better after we get to shore up for the matchup. I would not call this, especially in the state the main deck is in right now, a best of 1 deck. If you want to play this deck in best of 1, go ahead and shoot a couple of cut downs or torch the towers or something into the board, maybe even pre-board a pyroclasm or something like that, because mono red and Deep Cavern Bat too are just kind of everywhere. I feel like if you're not playing against mono red, you're playing against Deep Cavern Bat. So if you want to main deck those little removal spells from the sideboard, I think that's what you want to be doing in best of 1. Go ahead and do that. Matter of fact, that's exactly what I did when I was recording footage to try to get an example game for this video, is I jammed some games in best of 1. Oh, whoa, this lamp keeps going in and out over here. That's not part of the bid, by the way. That's not, did it again. That's not like a Duskmourn thing that I'm doing. Have I actually ended up, it's back on, in like I should probably just turn it off, in some sort of Duskmourn alternate reality here? Am I in a haunted house at this point? I'm not actually sure, but let me turn that off so I don't actually burn the house down. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Example games. I was trying to segue into the example games. It was going to be a really good dovetail, too. It was going to be very satisfying, but I guess now I have to freak out about living in an actual haunted house. Anyway, there's an example game. Let's look at it. Now, we joined this game with Golgari already in progress. Don't worry, you didn't miss much. They just tried to cast Deep Cavern Bat. We cut it down. On our turn 2, we get Overlord of the Baelmerk, but don't actually hit anything with it, which is lame. But they get Clifftop Lookout. Little ramp guy, good for them. We throw down Raucous Theater and decide to get Piggy Bank onto the table. Make sure we can try to ramp into this Conquest. On a slightly later turn, they get Hauntwood Shrieker, which is the first of a few scary turns the Golgari deck gets to take in this deck. We're just going to know where to run the Shrieker away, threat neutralized, hold up a couple of mana for Go for the Throat, which we're going to be very happy that we did, because opponent gets Sheldred on this turn, along with a Mosswood Dread Knight out of the exile zone. But that's cool. We just got Throat Go for the Sheldred. We're going to take it out again, threat neutralized. We get to keep playing Magic and try to draw this other land or get rid of this Piggy Bank somehow. But we draw into Overlord of the Baelmerk, resolve FOMO, and discard the Overlord, drawing into a second Lich-Knights Conquest. But we get him with Piggy Bank, they block up, trade, and we get a treasure token. They cast the Mosswood Dread Knight out of exile again. That's the creature they block with, and they cut down our FOMO and resolve the Mosswood Dread Knight. Good turn for the opponent, but we finally get to Lich-Knight Conquest. We decide to just sacrifice both our enchantments, get back our Overlords, hit a couple of times on this one, Courage the first time, FOMO the second time, and I'm willing to acknowledge I probably should have taken the Piggy Bank to make sure that we can resolve a second Lich-Knight Conquest later. Don't worry, it won't be a problem. Opponent gets a second Hauntwood Shrieker and draws a card off of Mosswood Dread Knight. Another quality turn for them, but we're going to bang in with both of our Overlords and get Piggy Bank twice now, having learned our lesson on these hits. They chump block so they don't just die because they're already at 10, and we resolve Piggy Bank as well as Fear of Missing Out here. We discard Calamity That's going to be important in a moment. You'll see why, but we say go. An opponent has their best turn yet. They attack in with Hauntwood Shrieker, get their Manifest Dread. We're going to block up with Piggy Bank, making sure that we get our treasure token. And then they do a couple of great things, like resolve a Vault-Born Tyrant and get a Fabled Passage. Those are very good things to do with your turn in a game of Magic the Gathering. They also get to cut down the FOMO to end the turn. Again, great turn from opponent, but we're just going to cast Lich-Knights Conquest and win the game. Here's how it works. We're going to get Calamity back, as well as Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, it's hard to say, and Overlord of the Bale Merc. We go face with the Overlord of the Boiler Bilges trigger, and with the Bale Merc trigger, we get a Fear of Burning Alive. Saddle up the Calamity with the Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, make 2 copies of it, go face with all of them. The opponent sees the writing on the wall. We're done. But that's basically all I got for this one. Let me know how you felt about it down there in the comments section, and on your way out, make sure you hit that button shaped like a thumb. You could also check out the deck list. There's a deck list down there from Moxfield of all places. That's right. If you want to reward my decision to finally step into the 21st century and give you a deck list you can download straight to MTG Arena like everyone's been doing for 2 years now, then check out the Patreon, because I'm no longer really going to be earning any money through TCG Player affiliate chips or anything like that, because that's how I would earn money. That's why they were TCG Player deck lists for the last like 2 or 3 years when they shouldn't have been. Well, now I've just decided to forego making any money off the affiliate ship and actually give you what you've been asking me for a while, which is Moxfield deck lists. Now, if you want to help me make up that monetary loss, check out the Patreon. That would be a really nice thing for you to do. I would appreciate it. I'm worth $1 a month, I think. At least that's what my therapist told me. And then I told her, you're worth $200 a month. I'm just kidding. I don't have a therapist. I just wanted to do that bit, but I should probably have a therapist. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one, for real this time. Just hit me up in the comments and let me know any thoughts or concerns you might have about the deck tech. I am Dev from the place, and I am donezo for this one-zo. That is Allski Kowalski. So I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.